Ever since I could remember, the only thing I ever really wanted as a kid was a bike. I must have spent a massive part of my early childhood with me nose pressed up against Kingston Cycle's window, eyeing up all of the various delights on offer with me heart racing in tandem, until Mam would have to drag us away saying, "We can't afford it, whether it's Kingston Cycles or any other bike shop in Hull." And then she'd say something about Pratt's, which wasn't like her at all. Not that I didn't have plenty of other stuff I could do by way of playing out. Knock off ginger for starters. You know, knocking on people's doors and running away, basically. It's got different names depending on where you go in the country. Like this one time, I was trying to explain knock off ginger to this Cockney bloke, and he thought I was trying to sell him some stolen root seasoning. And they have the audacity to reckon we're daft. Then he starts going on about East End hard men. You know, as they do, and he asked me where you can find any gangsters in Hull. Well, I thought he'd said ginsters, so I said you could try Bob Carver. He was practically drooling, especially when I started telling him about the filleting and battering process. He was like, "What, he removes the bones and puts them in a deep fat fryer? That's brutal, mate, brutal." I didn't have the heart to spoil it for him. Another game we used to play was off-ground tig, which speaks for itself, really. We had this one kid in our street who was so determined to win at off-ground tig, he used to come out in a tansad. You know the sort of kid who takes his football in if he's losing, or gets his mam to stop the music in just the right place when you're playing past the parcel. Anyway, we soon put a stop to that. What we did was strap him in and put him outside this bloke's house, who Mam had told me worked down Arnold Lane and had a strange hobby. Then we knocked on the door and just left him to it. I tell you what, he never came out in a tansad again. He never came out. Full stop. Not 'cause he was traumatised or anything. Nah, he'd moved to a barrack house. I had to ask me Mam what one of those was, and she said even though people go on about them, she thought they were a bit wimpy. You know, construction-wise. One of my older brothers reckoned it was what he would call a cautionary tale, meaning if you ain't got your feet on the ground and you take a little trip and then knock on the wrong door, you could end up in a barrack house. Speaking of tales, that was another thing about Mam. She always had plenty of stories she used to tell me. She had loads of them. The one that always used to get me the most was the one she used to tell me about a naive red-haired boy who goes to a place called the Land of Green Ginger to look for the world's smallest window, only to find it and then end up being really disappointed. But then he realises disappointment is part of life, and as a result he becomes less naive. As Mam used to say, bit disappointed, a bit less naive. And she'd had more than a fair share of disappointments, and was anything but naive. Not that she made them all up by herself, though. She wasn't entirely beyond changing somebody else's story to suit her own. There was this one she used to tell me, a chocolate orange, about a massive chocolate factory on Great Thornton Street, that was round the corner from a dairy, a milk bar she called Corova, and a lemonade stand called Foggy Pop, and all of them were positioned apparently in such a way that they had an effect on how the chocolate tasted. As Mam told it, the factory was owned by a man with a funny name and what she described as having an eccentric appeal, especially as far as kids were concerned. She reckoned his success was mostly down to him capturing and taking advantage of a large group of workers from the third world, who he fed on not much more than what nowadays you'd call an all-you-can-eat buffet. What he did was dress them up in white boiler suits and black bowler hats and subject them to a continuous soundtrack of the old Ludwig van, whilst giving them directions in a language called sat-nav. "Left at the everlasting gobstoppers, my little droogies." He then sets up this massive publicity campaign so he can lure a bunch of children to the factory and with nothing in the way of health and safety, maims and disfigures 4 of them just because they've got too much to say for themselves. Before he finally decides that the 5th kid, a token poor kid, who'll pretty much do as he's told, becomes the winner and then continues the factory owner's legacy. Later on, when we did the story at junior school, I shouted out, "That's Mam's story, and that's not how you pronounce his name." And then I went and told the teacher how you say it the right way. Oh, I got into a fair bit of trouble, and I was a bit disappointed. But then I realised, a bit disappointed, a bit less naive.